finishing my coil pot vessel with watercolor. So I have all my supplies ready. I went ahead and printed out my planning page for my color, but you would want to look at your iPad. I have my watercolor palette ready, some paintbrushes and paper towels, and I like to have 2 cups of water. One with water to clean my brushes and one with fresh water to pick up new colors. Now, to get started on this, I want to begin by painting from lightest to darkest. So I'm going to go ahead and start with my flowers because I planned for them to be a kind of orangey yellow. Now I want them to be pretty rich in color. So one thing I can do is use a little bit of water and try to pull up a lot of paint on my palette so I get a really thick, concentrated consistency. So one dip in the water and kind of blending on that pad and pulling up a deep, rich yellow color is what I'm going to try to achieve. So I will carefully lay on my yellow paint. It's very pigmented and strong, which is just what I want. Now I also plan to go over it with some blue, and I might even add some orange as well to kind of highlight, create a little bit of interest. So it's not just a flat color, but more of a rich layered color. But as you can see, it's going on really well and getting really good coverage. I can always go over it a second time if I don't think it came out just the way I wanted to, keeping in mind that the clay will get a little bit dark when we re-wet it, when we paint it. So allow it to completely dry. It doesn't take too long, but you won't see kind of the way the color actually is until you go ahead and let it dry a little bit. So I might just kind of put that yellow in the center as well, and then go over it once it's dry with the blue like I had planned. So I'll let this area dry and move on to a different area. So I'm going to use my 1 cup to rinse my brush and my other cup for fresh water. Now I'm going to start on the body of my coil pot with a kind of lighter blue, and I'm going to mix it with a little bit of this kind of teal to get the color that I want. So keeping in mind that you don't have to use the straight colors out of the palette, that you can mix your colors, and you can do that on the lid of your watercolor dish. So you can see I'm mixing my blue here, and I'm gonna go ahead and kind of start with a light wash, and I can build the color up as I go. So I don't want to saturate the pot, but you can see how this blue kind of lays on, and once it dries, I can decide whether or not I want to go in with another layer if I want to make it darker, or if I like it just the way it is. So I'll mix up a little bit more, grab my fresh water again, continuing to work on this area, being very careful when I get to the area around my flower because I don't want to accidentally bump it with the blue. So paying close attention to that area is going to be really important. So I'll continue to do this, and when it dries, I'm gonna go in and kind of highlight my coils and accent my flowers as well. Once I've done my first coat, it's time for me to go in and add some detail. I'm going to go ahead and go back to my flowers. I painted each one of them with a base yellow, and now I'm going to add some interesting details to really make them pop. So I'm going to choose this dark navy blue, and I'm going to be careful to make sure I make the paint really thick so that it doesn't bleed and run into anything else. If I were to use a really thinned out version of my paint, then I would run the risk of it kind of bleeding into areas I don't want it to bleed into. So I'm going to be careful and cautious to make sure that I'm using it in its really thick consistency, so that way I can have a lot of control over it. So I really like that. I also had some kind of like details here coming out from the center that again I would only do with a nice thick consistency of my watercolor so that it doesn't bleed everywhere. I really like the way that looks. I'm going to go ahead and kind of do some detailing on the edges as well. So this is the area where we add our details that we want to be careful, take our time, and refer to our plan. You definitely don't want to wing it. It might end up not as well as you had hoped, which is why this extra step for planning and preparing for our color is so valuable. Because once we paint this on, I can't take it off. It's there for good. So I'm really happy with that, and I think I'm gonna leave it and come back to it and see if I want to add anything else. But I'm also going to use this blue to kind of highlight my coils. One of the cool things about coils is not only is it a construction method, but it is also decorative. And I love the way the coils have this kind of wavy feeling to them. So I'm actually going to thin out this deep dark navy blue, unlike what I just used it as. So I'm going to add lots of water on my palette, and I'm really going to get a nice thinned out version. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to drop the color in between my coils, and I'm going to allow it to run and spread along the seam. So I'm going to kind of load up my brush, and I'm going to go ahead and just tap, and it's going to kind of run and fill out those seams. So I'm still using a thin brush so that I can get in between without getting it everywhere, because I still want to retain my lighter blue on the outside. So I'm going to very carefully kind of load up my brush and kind of drop it into those seams and allow it to run. So now I'm really highlighting that detail. And if I feel like it maybe went over a little bit, I could certainly touch up again with my lighter blue to kind of spread out that extra if it got a little out of control. So I can kind of work it back and forth, but keeping in mind that I can't take it away. So I do want to kind of work slowly. I can always add more paint. I can always make things darker, but I can't really lighten it back up. So we want to kind of build up our darks and our colors when possible, and choose colors that are going to kind of go well together. I went with blue, light blue and dark blue, because I knew it would give me a little bit more wiggle room, as opposed to doing something like yellow and black, where if I made a big mistake with the black, the yellow would turn a really kind of mucky, maybe even like brown green color that I would be really unhappy with. So using these colors in the same kind of color family gave me a lot more room for error if I needed it. So I'm going to continue to highlight these coil lines with my navy blue until I've worked all the way around and all the way through. Now that I have the details in my flowers and that darker blue color between my coils, I'm gonna go ahead and paint the inside. Because I wanna highlight that contrast, I'm gonna go ahead and paint the inside with my dark blue again. Instead of using a small brush, I'm gonna use a large brush and I'm gonna thin it out still to make it more of a wash. And I'm going to go ahead and paint the inside of my coil pot as well. After I go ahead and paint the inside, I'm going to allow this to dry completely, and then I'll come back and touch up any areas that I feel need it. But I'm pretty happy with how it came out overall, and I think it looks really close to my plan. So I'm super excited, and I can't wait to see it totally dry.